Order, please. Before we begin the daily routine, I'd like to bring to the attention of the honourable members some special guests who are in the Speaker's Gallery today. There are 8 grade 10 students from Oxford Regional High who are actually taking a grade 11 course, but they're here with their teacher, Mr. Keith Hunter, and with their chaperones, Mr. Dave Clark and Mrs. Dave Clark, and they're here visiting the House today to watch the last day of the proceedings of this session. Maybe. They're if the government's good, they're having they've had a tour of the legislature, and they're going to spend the rest of the afternoon in the city. I'd ask the students and their teacher and the chaperones to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House, please. Thank you. Before we begin the daily routine, the subject for this evening's late debate was submitted by the honourable member for Dartmouth North. Be it resolved, the Minister of Community Services and the Government act in a responsible manner and bring a resolution through binding arbitration to the ongoing dispute at the Regional Residential Service Society. Be debated this evening at 6 p.m. Begin the daily routine presenting reading petitions. The honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to table a petition on behalf of 32 residents of the Bar Settlement Road in my constituency. The operative clause, we the residents of the Bar Settlement Road petition the Minister of the Department of Transportation and Public Works, the Honourable Michael Baker, to act without delay in effecting much-needed upgrades to our roads in order to reduce and eliminate the flat tires, broken struts, holes in exhausts, fuel tanks, and other parts of our vehicles that we've been forced to tolerate from travelling over this deplorable road. And, Mr. Speaker, I've added my name in support.
Absolutely. Petition is tabled. Presenting reports of committees. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, as Chairman of the Committee on Law Amendments, I'm directed to report that the committee has met and considered the following bills. Bill number 9, an act to amend Chapter 300 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Municipal Elections Act, Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act, and Chapter 302 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Municipal Grants Act. Bill number 52, an act to amend Chapter 5 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Cosmetology Act. And Bill number 53, an act respecting the practice and regulation of massage therapy. The committee recommends these bills to the favorable consideration of the House with certain amendments. And, Mr. Speaker, I request that permission be sought to add these bills to the order paper for today so they can be dealt in the Committee of the Whole.
Is it agreed? Agreed. Order these bills be referred to the Committee of the Whole House on Bills. Table reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This may be my last opportunity to formally speak in this House before the next provincial general election. As I have long stated in this 4th year of our government, I will put my mind to election timing after this sitting of the House, towards an election in the second half of 2003. But in the event that this is my last chance before the next election, I would like to pay tribute to a number of members in our House. Members who have stated they will not reoffer in the next election. I could think of no more fitting a member to pay tribute to than the member for Cape Breton Nova, the Dean of this House. First elected to represent his constituents in 1970, the member for Cape Breton Nova will not be remembered for any one political party. He will be remembered. The member for Cape Breton Nova will be remembered for his devotion to his constituents, and he will be remembered for his ever unique interventions on behalf of his people on the floor of this House. We have never seen the kind of the member for Cape Breton Nova, and we will never see his kind again. In 1919, Vladimir Lenin said, "Victory in war goes to the side whose people has greater reserves, greater sources of strength, and greater endurance." I can think of no member in this House with greater reserves, sources of strength, and endurance than the member for Cape Breton Nova. And I will truly miss his resolutions.
There's more to come.
Which brings me to our retiring members from the so-called class of 1984, each representing one of the official parties in this House. To the member for Dartmouth East, a fellow physician, thank you for your service to the people of Dartmouth. Thank you for your service to your fellow members of the Liberal Party. And thank you for your work for all Nova Scotians in a number of challenging portfolios, ranging from community services to housing, municipal affairs, to health, justice. I know I speak for all members of the House when I wish the member for Dartmouth East and his wife Linda the very best as they re-enter private life. Now to the member from Sackville-Cobequid, perhaps the most articulate in defining the differences between the orange team, the red team, and the blue team. Indeed, the member for Sackville-Cobequid is perhaps the only person in this place to wear the title as the NDP's gas man as a badge of pride. Seriously, the NDP would not have served as Nova Scotia's official opposition for so long, for so well in Nova Scotia without the years of work of the member from Sackville-Cobequid. Strong opposition helps make better government. Put simply, the New Democratic Party would not have been a strong opposition without the efforts of the member from Sackville-Cobequid. So please thank Diane and your family for allowing you to make a difference in Nova Scotia. And to another member of the class of '84, the one member whose constituents provided him with a timeout from 1993 to 1998, the member for Argyll, the Minister of Finance. His experience, his commitment, his leadership helped make history in Nova Scotia. Not one, but two balanced budgets after 40 years of red ink. The accomplishment of the member from Argyll is so important that no government, regardless of political party, would dare return our province to the road of deficit spending. So to the member for Argyll, the Minister of Finance, my colleague, my friend, his wife Grace, and the family, on behalf of all Nova Scotians, we thank you. And what can be said about the 15 years served by the member for Victoria? Be it the forceful advocate for communities ranging from St. Anne's to Meat Cove, or as a Minister of Natural Resources in the former McClellan government, the member for Victoria was there. Working hard, quiet but effective, the epitome of a member of this House who put his constituency first. Now, from the class of '84 and '88 to a former leader of the official opposition, may I mention the member for Halifax Atlantic. For 12 years, the member for Halifax Atlantic has worked hard for what he believed in. While there were many highs and lows in his public life, the member for Halifax Atlantic should be applauded for putting his wife Paula and their daughter Jessica first. Because when we look back on life, it truly doesn't matter whether one is able to build a party to historically high heights, as the member for Halifax Atlantic was able to do. What's truly important is family. And I applaud the member for Halifax Atlantic for putting his family first. Putting family first was never a question for the member for Pictou West. My dear friend from River John was faced with a personal tragedy which none of us in public life would ever want to face: the diagnosis of a terminal illness of their spouse in the midst of a general election campaign. Irrespective of this sad fact of life, the member for Pictou West soldiered on. She worked hard as a candidate and earned the support of the people of Pictou West. She mourned the loss of her husband Bill, and she rolled up her sleeves and got to work on behalf of her people. And thanks to that unselfish effort, the member for Pictou West, her people have received a new high school, more dollars for schools, more books, more support for health care, and more money for roads. The member for Pictou West set aside the challenge of a great personal loss at the outset of her term. She overcame this sad occasion and got on with the job at hand, delivering results for the people of Pictou West. As I conclude my statement, let us all pay tribute to the work of those MLAs who have decided to leave this House. Nova Scotians in Lyons Brook, in Sackville, in Tuscott, in Dartmouth, in Bedeck, in Whitney Pier, and in Spryfield will remember their work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's with a great deal of pleasure I join in the opportunity to, I guess, first to respond to the ministerial statement of the Premier, but to add our voices to what was said. It's very much the case that we'd like to be associated with all of the things that he has had to say, because we know in this party that everyone who comes to this House brings with them their own perspective and their own experience, and they apply that every day to the work that they do. It's a valuable contribution to our communities. It's a valuable contribution to our province. In this House, people watch us sometimes during question period. They see heated exchanges. They see us fight these battles on terms that we try to define in our own ways. And I've heard it said from time to time that we are political enemies. Well, Mr. Speaker, I think that the truth is that we are opponents, we are adversaries, but I don't believe that we are enemies. And the work that these people have done over their lives exemplifies all of the things that are best about our system of government. The idea that you can loyally oppose the government, that you can bring forward and ask every tough question, and that it has an appropriate place in this House. So, while I believe that we may be opponents and adversaries, we leave this House with a great sense of fellowship for those who have decided that they will not seek re-election. Because we are truly the inheritors of a proud tradition. Each of us in our parties recognize the values that are put forward by our members when they bring them here. And we will be poor for the fact that they have decided not to reoffer. And I want to add our congratulations to them and our best wishes that whatever they do in the future, may they have great success. Thank you.
The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Liberal caucus and our leader, Danny Graham, I'm pleased to rise and honor those MLAs for whom today is their last day, or could be their last day, in the House. All of these MLAs come from different walks of life and from different political spectrum. Yet when they entered the legislature, they were all united with one goal: to represent the needs and the wishes of their constituents. And Mr. Speaker, they all did so effectively. To the honourable member from Pictou West, you have served your constituents with honour and dignity, the true Pictou County way. You undoubtedly brought your passion for people to your caucus table. And indeed, this passion was shown daily in the legislature. To the honourable member from Argyll, you brought a true spirit of determination and great talent to whatever role you played as a member of this legislature. Monsieur le ministre, comme député acadien, tu as toujours eu la cause acadienne à cœur. Et ton travail ici à l'Assemblée a rendu notre communauté acadienne en Nouvelle-Écosse bien plus forte. To the honourable member from Halifax Atlantic, you led a party to great electoral gains. Mr. Speaker, this speaks volume for the member's leadership abilities, and we thank him for his contribution to the political process. To the honourable member from Sackville-Cobequid, you will be remembered in this chamber for your great oratory skills. Your ability to digest issues and bring forward sound, reasoned arguments are a testament to your dedication, not only to your constituents, but to the public service as well. To my colleague, the honourable member from Victoria, you are a true gentleman. Your ability to bring to our caucus table issues impacting not only your constituents, but those of all rural Nova Scotia has been invaluable. However, Mr. Speaker, the member of Victoria's talents will best be remembered in his role as Minister of Natural Resources. The honourable member's dedication to bringing forward endangered species legislation and his tireless work on a sustainable forest strategy has indeed made Nova Scotia a better place in which to live. To my colleague, the honourable member from Cape Breton Nova, your dedication to your constituents and solving their problems has never been, nor will never be, matched in this legislature. There were never problems that were too big or too insignificant for this member to solve. The member from Cape Breton Nova will, however, be best remembered on the floor of this House for not only his command of many languages, but as well his detailed knowledge and respect for the British parliamentary system. To my colleague, the honourable member from Dartmouth East, you are perhaps the greatest example today of translating your passions and previous profession into actions and results. Your passion for children were shown during your tenure as Minister of Community Services, with such achievements as amendments to the Children and Family Services Act, increased daycare spaces at times when money was tight, and commitments you've made to honour the profession of social work. As Minister of Health, completion of the telehealth network, the development of Cancer Nova Scotia, and your determination to recruit specialists through alternate forms of payment have all indeed made Nova Scotia a better place in which to live. Mr. Speaker, did I forget to mention that the honourable member was a great constituency person who cares deeply about the people you represent. So, in closing, to all colleagues on all sides of the House, please accept our best wishes in the times ahead. Whatever road life takes you, I'm certain that all of you will continue contributing your skills and talents to make Nova Scotia an even better place in which to live. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any further statements by ministers? Government notice the motion. Order, please. Apologize. The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It certainly has been a great honour to serve in this historic chamber, Nova Scotia's House of Assembly, and to be here as a representative for the wonderful people of Pictou West. It certainly wasn't my intention to become an MLA. However, it was with the encouragement of my late husband, Bill, and our area steering committee that I let my name go forward for the Progressive Conservative nomination for Pictou West. With the help and loyalty of many fine people, we won the seat back, which allowed me to represent the good people of my constituency. During my term here, I feel I've worked long and hard on behalf of my constituents. I've met many great and extraordinary people under many different circumstances, all of which has enriched my life and made my decision to retire both bitter and sweet. I want to thank you for letting me say these few words and allow me to salute my Premier, for whom I have great respect, and my colleagues who have been most gracious and kind and helpful to me, to the caucus staff who have looked after me so well, as well to all the members and the staff of this House who have made these past 4 years such an incredible experience. I'll certainly never forget my friends or my time here. Thank you so much.
Government notice the motion. The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the third session of the 58th General Assembly is drawing to a close, and whereas members of the Legislative Assembly could not conduct their business without the assistance and support of the staff of this chamber, and whereas these staff members always go above and beyond the call of duty to ensure that the House business runs as smoothly as possible, and we can all recognize that. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House thank all staff, including Richard Ramsey and Charlie Whalen, the administration staff under the direction of Jocelyn Scallion, Operations Manager Mike Laffin, Peter Terrio, and their efficient staff of pages and messengers, the staff of the Office of the Legislative Council, the Legislative Committee's office, enhanced under Robert Kinsman's direction, the very able crew of Legislative Television, our tireless Legislative Library staff of Margaret Murphy, Sandy Cook, and their most learned library staff, our legal advisors of the Office of the Clerk, and a special thanks to Patsy Gallant for sitting with us for one last season, and also thanks to our Sergeant-at-Arms, Mr. Noel Knockwood, and to all members of the Canadian Corps of Commissioners for their loyal support to all members. And I apologize for the length of the resolution, but Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Introduction to bills. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to table a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 246 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Labour Standards Code, to improve labour standards.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 246 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Labour Standards Code, to improve labour standards.
Bill 57, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 246 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Labour Standards Code, to improve labour standards.
Order this bill be read a second time at a future date. Notice of motion. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas our friend, the MLA for Sackville-Cobequid, was elected nearly 19 years ago and spoke in this House for the first time on March 1st, 1985, when he urged a fair funding formula for education. And whereas during his first 5 days in this chamber, he also urged action to provide affordable housing, release of the agreement to subsidize Pratt & Whitney, improvement of services to women, and the immediate construction of needed schools in Sackville. And whereas, Mr. Speaker, he has kept on talking and getting results on things that matter to Sackville residents and all Nova Scotians, therefore be it resolved that in the event that today is his last opportunity to say a few words in this House, members wish the member for Sackville-Cobequid well in future endeavours to improve his community and his province. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Counter-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Liberal MLAs Paul McEwen, Jim Smith, and Kenny McCaskill are retiring from political life and completing their last session in the House of Assembly, and whereas these three long-serving Liberal MLAs have contributed greatly to the province, the people they serve, and to the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia, and whereas Paul, Jim, and Kenny will be remembered by all for their distinguished service and their dedication to making Nova Scotia a better province. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize the incredible political contributions of Paul McEwen, Jim Smith, and Kenny McCaskill to the province of Nova Scotia, and thank them for their dedication to their constituents and to all Nova Scotians. And I would ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Counter-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Preston.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day from the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas at 38 years of age, Halifax resident Angela Vecchio Osmond has shown exceptional strength and courage as she has fought a very public battle with terminal breast cancer. And whereas upon discovery of a life-threatening illness, many people lose all hope, but this mother of two has tirelessly fought to extend her life as much as possible, and in doing so has become a spokesperson for living life to the fullest. And whereas Ms. Vecchio Osmond has chronicled her battle with the disease on Angela's Journey, a television health series broadcasted on CBC television, Health Matters, and also has delivered her encouraging message through speaking engagements and cable TV programming around the province. Therefore, be it resolved that every member of this House join in me in expressing our great admiration and respect for Miss Angela Vecchio Osmond, who has exhibited courage, strength, and a remarkable ability to continue to help with others, an incredible presence and message of hope, and she's truly an inspiration to us all. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Counter-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Order, please. The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on Thursday, May the 8th, 2003, Margot Kleiker peacefully left this world surrounded by her family and friends, and whereas throughout her life Margot brought warmth, joy, comfort, courage, and sage advice to her vast network of women and men for whom she cared, and whereas Margot's many talents and accomplishments, too numerous to list here, include the co-founding of the breast cancer survivors dragon boat team called Bosom Buddies, therefore be it resolved that members of this House extend our deepest condolences to Margot Kleiker's husband Ian, her daughters Molly and Sandra, and to all those who were privileged to have spent time in her warmth and wise company. Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move adoption of the following resolution. No, it's not about you today. Whereas the Liberals are the first party to come out of the blocks with a plan to address soaring insurance premiums, to quote today's Daily News, and whereas yesterday Liberal leader Danny Graham unveiled what is really the first detailed plan by any party to lower and stabilize insurance rates on a sustainable basis, to quote today's Chronicle Herald editorial, and whereas Liberal Daily, I'll table them all, and whereas Liberal leader Danny Graham unveiled an auto insurance plan Wednesday that will put a cap on pain and suffering damages and reduce rates by 15%, to quote paragraph 1 of today's Chronicle Herald front page headline news story, resolved that the press coverage of yesterday's Liberal insurance plan reflects reality, identifies who the leader is on the insurance issue, and opens the door to other parties to follow the Liberal lead if they wish.
Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Annapolis.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice, and on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Jessica Connell, 18, has recently captured the gold medal in the senior girls division, single division at the Youth Bowling 5-Pin Nationals held in Saskatchewan, and whereas Ms. Connell is a grade 12 honor student at Middleton Regional High School and has been accepted into Acadia for the fall of 2003, and whereas her accomplishment is made more significant, it is the first gold medal that Nova Scotia has won at the Youth Bowling 5-Pin Nationals. Therefore, be resolved that all members of this House applaud Jessica Connell in the receipt of her gold medal as the Youth Bowling 5-Pin Nationals and congratulate her on being the first Nova Scotian to receive it. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on the future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas federal government departments, agencies, and Crown Corporation who choose coverage under the Workers' Compensation Act are self-insured and pay WCB as an administrative fee to process claims. And whereas this means the provincial government and other employees who foot the bill for the workers' compensation system pay not one penny for claims made by federal workers. And whereas the Minister of Environment and Labour could have included federal firefighters at no cost under amendments to the Workers' Compensation Act to provide automatic assumption, but he passed up the opportunity to provide those workers with additional job protection. Therefore, be it resolved that this House express its dismay to the Minister of Environment and Labour for his failure to provide federal firefighters with additional protection under the Workers' Compensation Act.
Request for waivers is agreed. Here no. Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on the future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas last evening, the Minister of Health was met by a group of medical technologists on our way to a nomination meeting in Antigonish, who are expressing frustration over the Minister's lack of concern about the pending crises in their profession. And whereas the current Minister of Health and the former Minister of Health stand and stood in their place daily, saying they have a plan for health care, and it is working. Whereas it is quite obvious their plan did not include training and recruiting valuable allied health professionals like medical technologists, an issue identified in the Department of Health as one requiring attention. Therefore, be it resolved that the people of Nova Scotia recognize that this government has not only failed to appropriately plan for the health care needs of Nova Scotians, but they still have their blinders on when it is clear they are approaching a pending crisis with regard to the number of medical technologists in this province. And I'd ask for waiver of notice, Mr. Speaker.
Request for waivers is agreed. Here no. Notice is tabled. The honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Bannock Canoe Club, the oldest canoe club in Canada, will celebrate its 100th anniversary this year. And whereas many prominent Dartmouthians have worn the crimson and white club colours, including former Mayor Sidney Russell Urquhart, and two members have represented Canada at the Olympics, Chris Hook in the 60s and Mikhail Apostol in the 90s. And whereas the club has hosted 3 World Championships and 900 members currently represent the club in a wide variety of activities. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Bannock Canoe Club on 100 years of service in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, and Canada. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Mr. Waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Hants East.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas volunteerism is one of the most important fabrics of society and thus community life, and whereas Ms. Karen Aubry of Mount Uniacke has been consistently active in volunteering her talents, skills, and time to worthy causes in her community, and whereas Karen Aubry was honored on April 30th in Rawdon by the municipality of East Hants for her much appreciated work as a volunteer. Therefore, being resolved, this House of Assembly congratulate Karen Aubry on receiving her award and for her commitment to serving the community of Mount Uniacke. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver notice and passage without debate.
Question for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid on an introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to introduce a guest in the West Gallery today. Mr. Speaker, the lady who I'm about to introduce, a Sackville resident and a friend for a number of years, was telling me that she had never been to the legislature, but she wanted to find out exactly how it operated. And I told her that today would be the last day that we would probably be sitting this spring session. So she has decided to come in and to see the proceedings of the House. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask Wendy Piercy to please rise and receive the warm welcome of members of this House.
Certainly welcome our guest to the gallery today, the honourable member for Cape Breton and the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Florence Siggett, a resident of Coxey, Cape Breton, was honored as she received the Order of St. Canda Barbara, the patron saint of miners. She was presented this prestigious award, which recognizes the important role played by women in the promotion of mining communities. The conference was held last week at the annual meeting of the Canadian Institute of Mining, Metallurgy, and Petroleum in Montreal. And whereas Florence Siggett is the second Nova Scotian to receive the Order of Santa Barbara Award. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize Florence Siggett for her lifelong commitment to the mining community and congratulate her on her achievement. Mr. Speaker, I do request waiver of notice of passage without debate.
Waivers, is agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Order, please. The honourable member for Victoria.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 16th edition of the Cabot Trail Relay Race will be held this weekend in Victoria and Inverness County, and whereas this year the race has attracted 65 teams with a total of 1,105 participants. And whereas participants in this year's race comes from Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Quebec, Maine, Massachusetts, and the United Kingdom and the Grand Cayman. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate the organisers and all the participants for making the Cabot Trail Relay Race such a successful event. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
Question for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Sean Fuller announced his retirement from senior baseball last night in Truro after a 15-plus year career. And whereas Sean Fuller has been a member of the Truro Bearcats for 3 years and was an integral part of the team's 2002 Nova Scotia Senior Baseball League Championship season. And whereas Sean Fuller, in addition to demonstrating outstanding baseball skills, was a leader in the clubhouse and exemplified in very good measure all of the positive qualities one would desire in a high-level competitive athlete. Therefore, be it resolved that all members congratulate Sean Fuller on his outstanding senior baseball career and for being a positive example of the word sportsmanship. And Mr. Speaker, in addition to requesting waiver of notice, I want to say he's a fine gentleman, a little misguided in his political leanings, and I worked him that for 3 years without much success.
Question waiver? There's question waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Juno Beach Center project was developed by a group of World War II veterans who participated in the D-Day landings on June 6, 1944, and the subsequent battles in Normandy and throughout Western Europe. And whereas the Juno Beach Center at Courcelette-sur-Mer in Normandy will provide recognition of Canada's military and civilian contributions during the Second World War and preserve for future generations the knowledge of the contributions of that generation and honor the gifts of valor and freedom they gave to all Canadians. And whereas the Minister of Canadian Heritage has designated Juno Beach landing site to be the site of national historic significance to Canada, therefore be it resolved that the Government of Nova Scotia declare June 6, 2003 a day of recognition commemorating the opening of the Juno Beach Center in Normandy. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 6 Cape Bretoners will dress for Team Atlantic at the 17th Annual New England College and NHL Prospect Hockey Showcase beginning this Saturday in Boston. And whereas Jimmy Fahey, Franklin McDonald, David McBurney, Kenzie Shepard, Lance Gillies, and Brent McSween will all be participating this weekend. Whereas this is an opportunity for these players to display their talent to New England prep schools and college hockey scouts. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House wish Jimmy, Franklin, David, Kenzie, Lance, and Brent all the best in the upcoming weekend. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice, passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have a resolution here which I've managed to mislay, so I'll let another member go while I find it.
The Honourable Member for Hants East.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Minister as well. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the pursuit of scientific studies and research is one of the often unsung cornerstones of our modern and prosperous civilization. Whereas the study of agricultural science results in enormous benefits to people all over the world. And whereas Ms. Marie Diskowski of West Gore, who studies at the Nova Scotia Agricultural College, was awarded a prestigious postgraduate scholarship from the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, one of only 6 in Canada. Therefore, be resolved, this House of Assembly congratulate Marie Diskowski of West Gore on her postgraduate scholarship from the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada and wish her well in her future career. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton and the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Queen Elizabeth II Golden Jubilee Medal is awarded to citizens who amplify in the dedication to the well-being of others within their communities as well as their country. And whereas the 4-H Club is a community-based organization which aims to enrich the growth and development of rural youth. Ruth McNeil, General Leader of the Northside 4-H, and Sarah Vickers, member of the Northside 4-H Club, have both been awarded with the Queen Elizabeth II Golden Jubilee Medal for their timeless devotion to the club and its causes within the community. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House congratulate Ruth McNeil and Sarah Vickers in receiving the Queen Elizabeth II Golden Jubilee Medals for their hard work and dedication in the community. Mr. Speaker, I do request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the beef industry is very important to the agricultural mix in this province and our economy, whereas now is the time for cooler heads to prevail in order to secure a healthy beef industry in Nova Scotia. And whereas the knee-jerk reaction of the NDP to ban Alberta beef is the greatest overreaction to a crisis since the Health Minister told Nova Scotians to avoid Toronto because of SARS. Therefore, be it resolved that the government take every possible step to protect the beef industry based on solid evidence rather than the campaign of NDP fear which would wind up hurting the Nova Scotia beef industry as well as the industry in other parts of Canada. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
I hear several noes. Notice is tabled. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I did that to ensure that I would bring attention to this important resolution. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the ability to receive quality child care in your community is very important to all parents. And whereas the residents of the town of Lunenburg and surrounding area have been privileged to have the Lunenburg Daycare Center operating in their community for 30 years. And whereas the Lunenburg Daycare Center has, since opening its doors in February of 1973, been dedicated to providing a caring and nurturing environment to the children of the community. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly congratulate and thank the Lunenburg Daycare Center for the dedicated service it has provided to the children of its community over the past 30 years. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cole Harbour is for passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas DARE, the Drug Abuse Resistance Education Program, is designed to educate and protect children from the dangers of drugs. Whereas the DARE program operates in the school system with the support and sponsorship of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And whereas an award ceremony in June, students and teachers from Caldwell Road Elementary School grade 6 classes will be honored with DARE awards for their successful participation. Therefore, be it resolved that this House congratulate the grade 6 students at Caldwell Road Elementary School and Command Constable Pat Tardif of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Principal Dave Nogler, and teacher participants Keith McKay, Janice Murray, and Evelyn McMullen for their efforts in the delivery of the DARE program, and I ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Nova.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move adoption of the following resolution. Whereas while the Liberals are busy advancing remedies on the insurance problem, the Tories are busy disposing of Sydney Steel Corporation's producing units to Zoom Developments Limited of India. And whereas the plan the Tories have allowed to develop with Zoom is to take the Cisco plant apart piece by piece, ship all the numbered parts to India, and have them reassembled there like a large-scale jigsaw puzzle, like Lego. And whereas this plan to disassemble Nova Scotian industries and reassemble them in India constitutes the heart and soul of the ham plan for a greater Nova Scotia. Resolved that in the opinion of this House, the ham plan, which the Tories seems to be zooming away, is more than enough to zoom them off the political landscape in the near future. I rest my case.
Notice is tabled. The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas a story of triumph over cancer, 8-year-old hockey enthusiast and player Carson Bootlier of the North Side is truly an inspiration to us all. And whereas Carson is a past beneficiary of the Children's Wish Foundation, a former poster child for their campaign, and has appeared in one of their television commercials with East Coast pop band Great Big Sea. And whereas Carson must once again continue his battle against cancer, young Mr. Bootlier was featured in the Northside District Minor Hockey Novices Program Hockey Kids Against Cancer Tournament as the event guest of honor and ceremony official for the dropping of the puck. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House commend Carson Bootlier on his strength to overcome hardship and thank him because his brave efforts are an inspiration to us all. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Timberlea Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be asking for waiver and passage without debate. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas bullying has become one of the paramount concerns in many communities and schools throughout the province, whereas a group of students at J. Ilsley High School have declared today, May 22nd, Youth United Day, and will host an all-day conference focused on bullying, whereas the conference will examine what the students have identified as 36 causes and solutions to bullying and feature over 50 different presenters. Therefore, be it resolved that the House congratulate J. Ilsley High School, Vice Principal Terry Quinlan, student organizers Joan Gurney, Brittany Coughlin, Heather McLeod, and Roy Dempsey, and all those involved for this cooperative effort to identify strategies to tackle this important social issue. I ask for a waiver and passage without debate, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Minister of Community Services on a daily basis refuses to accept the fact that he has a role to play in resolving the strike between the employees of RRSS and their employer, and whereas yesterday employees were cautiously optimistic that there would be a reason to go back to meet with the conciliator, an action that has now been proven to be nothing but a tactic by this government to avoid negative media attention on the last day of the legislature, and whereas while the conciliator has called the parties back, he has not been provided with any support from the Minister of Community Services in the form of additional resources so that he can get to work and settle this 42-day-old strike. Therefore, it be resolved that all members of this House condemn the Tory government for their callous attitude to our most callous attitude to our most vulnerable citizens, and condemn their complete disrespect for the RRSS employees that has been displayed to date. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver, please.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? Here, no. Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Martin McDougall of Sydney will undergo the testing required to obtain his 5th degree black belt in Taekwondo, earning him the status of master. And whereas in Mr. McDougall's 22-year career, he has competed in World Championships, World Cups, and Pan Am Games and numerous Canadian competitions. And whereas Mr. McDougall, owner and instructor of East Coast Taekwondo, will take this test with several of his students, hoping to reach their next level, which takes 5 years of study and training to accomplish. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of this legislature recognize the 22-year commitment made by Martin McDougall and wish him every success in his upcoming examination. I would ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Dr. Brian Tennyson has been awarded the 5th Annual University College of Cape Breton Alumni Association Excellence in Teaching Award. And whereas in 1966, Dr. Tennyson arrived in Cape Breton to teach history at the then Sydney campus of St. Francis Xavier University. Whereas during his 37 years of teaching, Dr. Tennyson has championed the integration of Mi'kmaq cultural values into the UCCB curriculum and has been director of the Centre of International Studies from its inception in 1978. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Dr. Brian Tennyson on being awarded the UCCB Alumni Association Excellence in Teaching Award for the year 2002-2003. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Canada-wide Science Fair has recently taken place in Calgary, and whereas 6 Nova Scotian students received honourable mentions at the prestigious fair, 3 bringing home medals. And whereas Alex Legg was one of those receiving an honourable mention, a grade 9 student at Bayview Community School, Mahone Bay, he participated in the intermediate biotechnology division. Therefore, it be resolved that all members of the House congratulate all of the participants in the Canada-wide Science Fair and wish them all the best in their future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. Orders of the day or questions put by members. Question period begin at 1 o'clock, and then at 2 o'clock, the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier, who has taken responsibility for skyrocketing insurance rates. This is widely expected, Mr. Speaker, to be the last sitting of the legislature before a general election. And the Premier has decided that drivers in this province must wait until after the expected election before the legislature takes any action to lower auto insurance rates. The government's 4th anniversary is fast approaching. So my question is very simple. Why did the Premier decide to do nothing to to lower auto insurance rates during his 4 years in office?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I can remind the member opposite that we have a plan to address insurance rates. One of the key parts of that plan, of course, is the insurance bill that is before this House, and I would expect to be passed very, very shortly, which will allow the minister responsible then to go ahead by regulations and to start moving towards a more equitable insurance rate system for the people of Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, maybe the Premier is trying to learn from Bernard Lord's failure. His Tory cousins legislated prior approval of rates above a predetermined level, limited benefits for accident victims, a review of discriminatory rate setting, and a stronger consumer advocate. Sounds like the third party's plan. It didn't work, and it was so bad. It was so bad that the New Brunswick Tories dropped their own plan and made a whole new set of promises on Tuesday night. Since the Premier claims that within 2 weeks he will have a plan to lower auto insurance rates, why won't he commit himself to providing drivers with those lower rates right away?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Premier.
The government will be in a position by way of regulation once the insurance bill is passed to do exactly what the member opposite is asking the government to do. Unlike the position of the New Democratic Party, because if we took all of the advice that they give us, we would now have a situation in Nova Scotia whereby the meltdown would have resulted in tens of thousands of Nova Scotians being refused insurance. And we were not about to embark on that kind of a process. What we're doing is slow and deliberate, and we'll come up with the right answers.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the Premier had taken our advice, hundreds of thousands of Nova Scotians would have the lowest and fairest auto insurance premiums in the country. But you know something, Mr. Speaker? The Premier is the only party leader who can take action now instead of simply making promises. That, Mr. Speaker, is the privilege of power. It is the responsibility of government. If the Premier truly believes that he has a plan that will lower rates, he'd introduce that plan, hold the public hearings, and deliver those rates. If the Premier won't actually lower rates, if the Premier will ignore the fact that the lowest and fairest rates come from driver-owned, non-profit plans at no cost to the taxpayer, he'll just make another Tory promise. So my question is this. When did the Premier decide that he would not take action to lower auto insurance rates before his government's 4th anniversary?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the member opposite is quite correct when he said that there are privileges of power, but there are also responsibilities of power. And one of the responsibilities of power is not to do anything that will, in fact, have a negative effect on the people of Nova Scotia. Had we listened to the advice of that party, today we would have had a total meltdown of the insurance industry in Nova Scotia, and tens of thousands of Nova Scotians would not be able to access any form of automobile insurance.
Order, please. The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Strong leadership, clear course. 4 years later, here we are with the insurance question nowhere near being addressed by this government. Mr. Speaker, we know from the UARB report that the government would be justified in considering making structural changes to the current automobile insurance system in Nova Scotia. Yet instead of offering any meaningful solution on the issue, the Premier suggested that the insurance companies on their own should be the ones to solve this problem rather than his government leading the charge. What this Premier doesn't seem to understand is that government has a responsibility to help Nova Scotian drivers experience high insurance rates, and the people of Nova Scotia have waited 4 years for action from this majority government. So my question to the Premier is, can the Premier explain why he thinks it's up to the insurance industry itself to come up with solutions to the insurance problem faced by Nova Scotians?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And it is not only the insurance companies that we have turned to Nova Scotians. Anyone that has a responsible answer to a conundrum. But, you know, I think it's only fair because from time to time, the members of the third party have been critical of government. From time to time, we can be critical of them. And I had a constituent who just has been informed of a 250% increase in her automobile insurance costs. Same car, no accidents, and an unblemished record. What use is a 15% rate reduction to somebody that has been just served an increase of 250%?
The honourable member for Richmond on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, as I said,
Richmond has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, strong leadership, a clear course, and what do we get today? The white flag of surrender by this government. This government now saying 4 years, majority government, and we are bankrupt of any ideas and bankrupt of any solutions to deal with this problem, and we're asking for the help of everyone. Well, Mr. Speaker, criticize our plan if you want, but we at least had the fortitude to table our plan during the sitting of this House, something neither the government or the Socialist Party has had the fortitude to do, Mr. Speaker. We did not have to hide after the House rises to be able to come forward with our plan. In fact, we called it for debate yesterday, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government has had 4 years to deal with this issue. The UARB has clearly said there are problems and government would be justified in fixing that. I asked the Premier.
Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member Richmond has the floor.
Socialists are particularly loud today, Mr. Speaker, but I asked the Premier, can the Premier explain why his government failed Nova Scotians by refusing to bring forward a long-term solution to the insurance problem during this sitting of the legislature so that Nova Scotians throughout this province could get some real relief today from the rate shock that they are experiencing.
Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I can remind the member opposite that we've been working on a solution now for almost a year and a half. They came out with their plan yesterday, so it hardly the member opposite has hardly any credibility when he accuses the government of being slow off the mark. Slow off the mark is looking at a problem that has been there for a year and a half and coming out with a solution yesterday.
The honourable member for Richmond on your final supplementary.
So we've come out with our plan. You've had 4 years, majority government, all the staff at your hands, the entire civil service at your disposal, all the money from the Treasury Board to go out and do your polling, access to all sorts of experts, access to civil servants who've got years of experience in dealing with this, and yet you have the audacity, Premier, to say that we're late in coming forward with a plan. We at least put our plan forward, we called it for debate, and we presented it to Nova Scotians. What we get from this government, as I said, is the white flag, asking simply to freeze rates with no plan in sight. Mr. Speaker, I ask the Premier, with the enormous costs, present and future, of a government-run system, can the Premier indicate to Nova Scotians whether his supposed insurance plan is one that will risk Nova Scotians' financial future?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The biggest danger, of course, to the financial future of the province would be not to re-elect this government. But what I can say, Mr. Speaker, is that the member opposite has an issue. We must solve this problem without jeopardizing the financial future of the province, and we are determined to do that. And that's why we're going slowly and deliberately to come out with the best and most effective way to address the insurance rate problem here in Nova Scotia, at the same time not putting the province at severe financial risk. And we will do that, but with the discussion paper, with the consumer advocate, and with the piece of legislation that we will hope the House will see fit to pass before the end of the current day's sitting.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And this is such an important topic. I think I'll get into this as well, Mr. Speaker, and direct my question to the Minister of Environment and Labour, who does, as my helpful leader like to refer to him as, the minister responsible for sky-high insurance rates, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the leader of the official opposition pointed out to the government that nurses in Nova Scotia can't afford the sky-high insurance rates in this province. Today, the Nova Scotia Victorian Order of Nurses had made the situation even more clear. The organization says high insurance costs are making operations and each visit more expensive. In the end, Mr. Speaker, these rates will force the cost of home care up. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister, and we know that the government, Mr. Speaker, the Premier says they're going so slow that they're virtually in neutral. I want to ask the minister, why are you and your government stalling on this very important issue?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, it's passing strange that the member for Halifax for Sackville-Cobequid should accuse the government of stalling. We came forward within a matter of days of the opening of the House with a bill to pass through this House that would give us effective control over the insurance industry and insurance rates. The people that have been stalling, Mr. Speaker, are sitting in the benches over there.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid on your first supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the minister must think that May 1st is a fluid date, Mr. Speaker, because the bill will be effective back to May 1st, whether it passes today, tomorrow, or yesterday, Mr. Speaker. It's your bill, and you should know that. Mr. Speaker, the Victorian Order of Nurses also says that sky-high rocketing insurance rates are affecting their ability to recruit top professionals. They say that since field staff are required to have their own vehicles, increased costs make the VON a less attractive option. That's them saying it, Mr. Speaker. And I'll share their letter with the minister. They say that some nurses qualified for community-based care may seek employment somewhere else. Minister, skyrocketing insurance rates are an added strain that our health care system just can't afford. Mr. Minister, how much longer are you going to force Nova Scotians to pay for your inaction?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, certainly the high cost of insurance is affecting not only the VON, but affecting all Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, and I like to think that this government on this side of the House at least represents all Nova Scotians that are suffering from high interest rates. And, Mr. Speaker, I repeat my charge that at the present time, the government cannot do anything until that bill is passed.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier or the Minister might expect a rookie to believe that, Mr. Speaker, but I'm sorry, I can't buy it. Mr. Speaker, I haven't even seen the draft regulations that would be going along with this bill. Plus, Mr. Speaker, the legislation won't give the government the power to do half of that which they say that it will. Mr. Speaker, home care is an essential part of our health care system, whether the minister likes to acknowledge that or not. Nurses in this province have said high insurance rates are an extra cost that they just simply can't afford. The Victorian Order of Nurses say it's an added cost that may be forced to pass on, Mr. Speaker. For weeks, the Minister of the Environment, he's been doing a lot of talking and making an awful lot of excuses, but has been doing nothing. So I'm going to direct my final question to the Minister of Health. To the Minister of Health. Since your colleague, the Minister responsible for skyrocketing insurance rates, has done nothing to help in this regard, are you prepared to provide some extra funding to our health care system to account for the impact of the skyrocketing insurance rates?
Order, please. Order, please. You can almost say that was the Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid's final supplementary. Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I would refer that question to the Minister of Finance.
The The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Speaker, I'm not sure this will be my last answer. But I do want to say, Mr. Speaker, that we as a government have come up with a plan that we think if implemented will deal with the situation and won't be dealt with overnight. Mr. Speaker, I want to point out that the NDP's suggestion to any problem is to throw money at it.
The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, on November 19, 1999, the Premier of this province introduced a ministerial code of conduct. Mr. Speaker, the ministerial code of conduct clearly makes it a violation of ministerial responsibility to knowingly mislead or deceive this House or allow an agent of the government to do likewise. In fact, the first section says ministers must be truthful and forthright. Mr. Speaker, I wish to turn the Premier's attention to Hansard from April 17, 2001, where the Premier of this province said, quote, Mr. Speaker, what I will confirm is that a year from now, this government will introduce a balanced budget, and from that day onward, the debt of this province will no longer grow, end quote. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians know too painfully well that that just was not a true statement. So my question to the Premier, keeping in mind his own ministerial code of conduct, which was in effect at the time of that statement, was it the Premier's intention to provide false statements in this House, or did he simply not understand what he was talking about?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, and the government is very proud of its record, two successive balanced budgets after 40 years of red ink.
Order, please. The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, as well, the government will be coming forward with a commitment it made back in 1999 to deliver to the people of the province a debt reduction plan that will have specific targets that will indicate very specifically what will happen over the next term of this government if, in fact, this government is re-elected. This government is fiscally responsible. It has advanced the fiscal capacity of this province immeasurably over the last 4 years, and we're not through yet.
Now, member for Richmond on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Code of Conduct says ministers must be truthful and forthright. Since the Premier made that commitment, the debt of this province has grown by $200 million. Yet the Premier, who said he would respect Nova Scotians, still will not admit why he said what he said in April of 2001. Mr. Speaker, we take this issue very seriously. The debt of this province is an issue that all Nova Scotians take very seriously. And based on this Premier's own ministerial code of conduct, we have asked through a letter to the Commissioner to rule as to whether the Premier in these statements has actually breached his own code of conduct. Mr. Speaker, today is an opportunity for the Premier to either retract that statement that he made or admit to Nova Scotians that even with his so-called balanced budget, the debt of this province has continued to grow. And when the Premier made the statement, it was clear in their own budget lines the debt would continue to grow until 2005. So my question again to the Premier is, could the Premier explain why he said the debt would stop growing in 2002 when his own budget of 2001 clearly indicated that the overall debt of this province would continue to grow under his administration?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The member opposite is very creative. On the other hand, the facts speak for themselves, Mr. Speaker. When we came to office, despite claiming to have a balanced budget, in fact, the Liberal government was running a $500 million deficit on that particular year. That was a tremendous challenge for us as government. But over the next 3 years, despite that hidden deficit, we were able to bring in the balanced budget that we promised the people in 1999. We promised the people in 1999 that during the course of this mandate we would have a debt reduction plan in front of them, and that will be done before we call to the Lieutenant Governor to issue the writ. Mr. Speaker, we have kept our commitments to the people of Nova Scotia, and we will run on that record.
Now, member for Richmond on your final supplementary.
Well, so Mr. Speaker, before the House rises, no debt management plan, as promised, no information on the state of our public pensions, no insurance plan before the House rises. None of the important issues that affect Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, the Tory party has tried to run on the credibility of the Premier. Sir Premier, you, sir, stated in this House that under your government, the debt of the province would not grow. We know that that is not correct. You know that that is not correct. Your own code of conduct calls on you to be honest and forthright. That clearly cannot be the case when you said it would not grow and it has. So I ask the Premier again, will you take this opportunity today to admit to Nova Scotians that you were incorrect when you stated the debt would not grow and that in fact, under your administration, the debt will continue to grow in this province?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the people of the province are quite aware of the financial situation of the province back in 1999. I believe that's one of the reasons why we were elected. And the member opposite can be very, very creative in what he brings to the attention of the House. But, you know, Mr. Speaker, what we said to the people of Nova Scotia is that we would, and I again refer to a page that the member opposite fails ever to report to the House, and this is page 18. And this, the government, if elected, and this is what we were saying back in 1999, will establish practical targets for reducing the provincial debt, which has increased by almost $3.6 billion during 6 years of Liberal government. That is a commitment, Mr. Speaker, and it is a commitment we will keep.
The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is the Minister of Transportation and Public Works. On Tuesday of this week, I asked the Minister about air quality issues at the Central Services building on 6176 Yonge Street. His answers show that basically he didn't know that building owners have specific responsibilities under our Occupational Health and Safety Act. He also said he didn't know of any violations. Well, today I'm tabling a copy of the May 15th, 2003 compliance order issued to your department by the OH&S officer Shelley Gray. This document indicates no less than 4 violations of our occupational health and safety laws. So, Mr. Minister, will you explain why your department is breaking the law and why after 6 days of these orders being issued, you weren't even aware of non-compliance?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to answer that question for the honourable member. I can assure the honourable member that steps had been taken before the honourable member ever asked the question to remedy the difficulties with that building. Mr. Speaker, the building in question is safe, and there are ongoing actions by the department to ensure the building remains safe for the workers.
The honourable member for Timberley Prospect on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the air quality concerns at this building go back as far as last summer. Now, Mr. Minister, your department knew about them, but you didn't tell the people working there about these concerns as you're required to do by the law. I'll table some internal transportation and public works emails that clearly reveal your own H&S expert was frustrated by the lack of cooperation by your property management staff. On May 14th, Mr. Minister, this expert wrote, and it's included in this email, quote, "This is a clear violation of the Occupational Health and Safety Act and must be corrected at once," exclamation mark added at the end of that sentence by the writer. Mr. Minister, you've dropped the ball. Will you apologize to those working at this building on Yonge Street for letting them down, for not living up to your statutory responsibilities?
Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can assure you that we take very seriously at the Department of Transportation and Public Work occupational health and safety issues. I can assure you that proper steps have been taken and will continue to be taken to protect the workers' health and safety in that building. Thank you.
The honourable member for Timberley Prospect on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this minister's department in many areas where workplace hazards are a constant challenge, this minister has that ultimate responsibility. Many look to that department and that minister to lead by example, to inform the workers, and to treat them fairly. Mr. Minister, will you commit today to taking immediate steps to ensure that all divisions within the department that you're responsible for will learn by these mistakes? Absolutely. Will you personally admit that you have much to learn from these mistakes and that such failures to comply in the future will not happen under your watch in that department?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much to the honourable member for the question. I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, that while there's always something to learn, that with respect to this particular matter, the department has taken very seriously the concerns of those who work there. I can also tell you, Mr. Speaker, that meetings have been set up of a users committee in the building to ensure that all information about the safety of the workplace is communicated to the workers.
The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is for the Minister of Health. Prescription drug use across this province is a growing concern, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday we learned that the provincially funded drug monitoring program receives little funding and cannot do the job required. There are a number of drugs that are winding up on the street that have also been linked to increased crime. Mr. Speaker, OxyContin is a drug of particular concern. Prescriptions for this drug are high in Cape Breton, an area that has seen a consistent increase in crime rates for the last 3 years. I want to ask the Minister, it's clear the drug monitoring program needs to be improved. Are you prepared to immediately provide the necessary support to address this serious situation?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the prescription monitoring program is a very good one, Mr. Speaker, and it does make sure that the drugs that are on the list are kept track of. And Mr. Speaker, while the government would certainly be prepared to look at putting more resources into a particular program, I would not want to let anyone in this House or any Nova Scotian think that even the best monitoring program, the best funded monitoring program in the world is not going to put an end to the problem of addiction in our society. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
I'm a member for Halifax Needham on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, with the growing power of some of the narcotics that are being prescribed, we need adequate monitoring, Mr. Speaker. And the prescription monitoring program does not receive enough funding to do a comprehensive job. Under the present system, we can expect, if it isn't improved, to see more prescription drugs reach the street, and that's what needs to be addressed, Mr. Speaker. This is a very serious issue. It warrants a commitment from this government. So I want to ask the Minister, what is her plan to address the immediate needs of Cape Breton with respect to this issue?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I know the member from Halifax Needham knows that Nova Scotia has the only prescription drug monitoring program in Atlantic Canada. Mr. Speaker, the issue here, of course, and has been for many, many years, even before Prohibition, Mr. Speaker, there was such a thing as prescription drug abuse. This is an important step, Mr. Speaker, but the problem is the number of people in our society who become drug addicts, whether it's alcohol addicts or prescription drug addicts or illegal drug addicts. That is the issue that we must get at and must solve, Mr. Speaker, and it will be not be accomplished only through prescription drug monitoring. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I agree with the Minister that addictions in our community, our society, our province are a serious problem. But I'm trying to get at a specific problem, and the Minister is avoiding answering questions with respect to this specific issue. Prescription drug abuse is not going to go away. It will only get worse. But OxyContin is being heavily prescribed in Cape Breton, and drug abuse in that community is increasingly being linked to crime. So we need to take action on this issue, Mr. Speaker. So my question to the Minister is, when can we expect a comprehensive plan from your government with respect to this specific issue?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we know that this particular drug is being prescribed more in Cape Breton and the rest of the province. And that is the particular drug that is making the news today, Mr. Speaker. A few years ago, the issue was dilaudid in Pictou County. Mr. Speaker, there is a very serious problem in our society and past societies of people needing to be out of it. And Mr. Speaker, government action on this one drug in Cape Breton is not going to solve the problem of drug addiction in our society. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Mr. Speaker, well, the other members bring up the subject of my concern, yes. I want to ask the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries, who also answers for Sydney Steel Corporation to the House, if he could bring the House up to date on the Zoom Development Limited of India purchase of the Sydney Steel plant for, I believe, some $4 million, and the plans to dismantle it piece by piece, number all the pieces, and then put them back together in the proper order in India so they can make steel over there and sell it to us. Could he confirm that that is indeed the Conservative plan for the future of Nova Scotia?
Mr. Responsible for Cisco.
Thank you,
The honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the member bringing the question forward. He's had a number of opportunities always late in question period. It is a significant issue. He's well aware of the situation with regard to Zoom. We canvassed the world to try and find a buyer for the electric arc furnace. Prior to that, as one of our commitments, we attempted to find a buyer who would continue to operate that facility. That wasn't possible. We moved forward with a plan that was well thought out and reasoned. We're now about 60% of the way through decommissioning, and that's within 18 months of having made the final decision. So we're moving forward. The Zoom proposal is the best proposal. It will see a return on the investment. We'll not recover the entire investment, but then again, for a number, approximately 30 years, that operation continued to run in a deficit position, accumulating about $3 billion to the debt of this province.
Now, member Cape Breton Nova, on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, assuming that what the minister has just said is so, I would like to ask him, through you, how was the price of $4 million established, and what relationship did it bear to the appraised value of the facility that was being sold?
The honourable Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I indicated in my previous answer, we canvassed the world to try and find a buyer. The reality is the steel market is depressed, has been depressed. It's very, very difficult to make that work. Zoom, an Indian-based company, have decided that they would like to acquire that asset. They will put it where they can get a return on their investment. It's not up to us to dictate where that should be.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova, on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, that didn't really answer my question because it didn't tell us whether $4 million represented the value of the plant or was a reduced value or perhaps an inflated one over the true appraised value of Sydney Steel. He's saying that they canvassed the globe and Zoom was the best that they could find. I could mention some other possible candidates that were expressing interest. I can mention, for example, Transmet of Yekaterinburg, Russia, formerly Sverdlovsk. And I would like to know if it is not known to the minister that Transmet was interested in operating the Sydney Steel plant on site. Why would a bidder that would be interested in operating the plant on site in Sydney be considered objectionable versus one that wanted to take the plant down piece by piece and ship it overseas?
Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As the member opposite knows, that electric arc furnace, when it was newly installed, was worth some $293 million. Now, is that close to $4 million? It is not, Mr. Speaker, and I think the member opposite realizes that. But when you're selling things in a decommission, you have to take what the market will bear. $4 million was the best offer. It certainly is a far cry from the $40 million annually we put in that plant as a subsidy, as I said earlier in response to a question, contributing some $3 billion to the debt of this province.
Gentleman member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my question is for the minister responsible for community services.
Order, please. Gentleman member for Dartmouth North.
My question is for the minister responsible for community services. What a charade his government put the residential society workers through yesterday. What a terrible trick he pulled. Terrible. When he was confronted yesterday, he told the workers he would find a solution. Then he left it to the RSS lawyer to say that solution involved the same offer. My question to the minister, why are you employing these tactics, and are you trying to break the union?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I think that we've been fairly consistent on this, and I have personally. I would suggest that to both parties that the place to resolve this is at the bargaining table at RRSS, and the union NSGU Local 66 have got to get back to the bargaining table. That is the only place where they're going to resolve this, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. He told workers one thing to their faces, then he left it to the RRS lawyer to tell them the other. This government has shown it is not only unfair, but it is underhanded. It's a lesson the paramedics learned. It's a lesson the seniors learned. It's a lesson the nurses and other healthcare workers have learned. My question to the Minister of Community Services is simple. Is your government going to deal fairly with these workers, or are you going to continue to insist that our RSS keep the same offer on the table?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, I think that it's incumbent on any minister to always be consistent in the message. I would challenge the member opposite to go through Hansard and check the statements that I have made and others of this government have made on this issue. We've been consistent, we've been fair with this sector, we've put substantial new resources into it, and we have always been above board and respected the collective bargaining process. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman member for Dartmouth North on your final supplementary.
That minister led them to believe something different yesterday. The NSGEU president said this morning that this government's action in the past 24 hours are insulting. What's worse, she says, you are playing a game that rather than trying to negotiate a deal. Mr. Speaker, it is now obvious this government has lost the trust of our RSS workers and their union. It is obvious arbitration is the only solution to the impasse this government has created. My question to the minister, why won't the minister finally do the right thing and order arbitration to settle this mess his government has created?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, in Nova Scotia, we have a collective bargaining process, and the union and the employer understood the labor laws when they got involved in these negotiations, Mr. Speaker. When they decided to withdraw their services, they knew that there was no provision for binding arbitration. We are respecting the collective bargaining process, and we encourage both sides to get back to the table, because that is the only place, Mr. Speaker, where they can bring about a resolution to this issue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is also to the Minister of Community Services responsible for housing. Mr. Speaker, Ken Goldenberg is a 35-year-old constituent with limited mobility due to a degenerative muscular condition which eventually will lead to his requiring a wheelchair. Mr. Goldenberg currently lives in an apartment on the second floor of a building without an elevator or a lift. Since 2000, Mr. Goldenberg has provided your department with multiple documents from physicians, physiotherapists, and other healthcare professionals indicating that he needs assistance from your department for an accessible unit, but yet there's been no satisfactory solution. So, Minister, my question to you is, what are you prepared to do to help Mr. Goldenberg find accessible housing?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for bringing it to my attention. I would suggest that in cases involving individuals, which I'm not able to discuss here on the floor of the legislature, I would encourage any member of any party to bring it to me privately, and I would try to look into it and get an answer for them, and I would certainly be prepared to do that for the member opposite if she would provide me with that information.
Here, here. The honourable member for Halifax Needham on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know the minister doesn't like to talk about these cases on the floor, but this, I've had much correspondence with the minister, the former minister, and with the department, and Mr. Goldenberg is getting frustrated, and he wants this matter raised here on the floor. Mr. Speaker, that minister's department has offered a 35-year-old a unit in seniors housing, has offered him a unit that's accessible on the inside but not on the outside, and an additional $100 in rent supplement to the measly $212 that he gets to rent an apartment. So he would have $312 to go looking in Halifax for an accessible unit. Mr. Speaker, these aren't solutions. So my question to the minister is, what are you prepared to do to offer a real solution to Mr. Goldenberg?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
What I'm hearing from the member opposite is that, in fact, there have been discussions going on between the Housing Authority and her constituent. As I said in my first answer, if she wants me to intervene and ask questions on behalf of one of her constituents, as I would for any member of this House, that it would be appropriate to apprise me of the concerns, and I would do what I can to look into the situation for them, as I try to do for other members when they bring these matters to me under those circumstances.
Here, here. The honourable member for Halifax Needham on your final supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, I have my file with me today, and I will provide it to the minister. And I would ask the minister for a full and immediate review of this file, and to have officials from your department meet with Mr. Goldenberg to find an appropriate solution in a timely fashion. This has gone on for 3.5 years, Minister.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd be very pleased to accept that file, and as I said previously, have staff look into it and hopefully bring this to a satisfactory conclusion.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, my question, I don't want the Education Minister to go home feeling neglected, so I'll direct my question to the Education Minister today. Mr. Speaker, over the past several months, what we've seen from this government are a lot of pre-election announcements that don't solve the real problems facing Nova Scotians. If you consider when this government announced their student debt reduction program with the claim that it would help students with Nova Scotia student loans pay off their debt when they graduate. Mr. Speaker, what this government failed to mention is that no student will benefit from this program until next year. Again, nothing more than an empty promise to get through an election. So my question to the minister is, Mr. Speaker, can the minister explain why he thinks he could mislead students in this province before an election when he knew full well the program wouldn't help any student until 2004-2005 budget year?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question. Obviously, Mr. Speaker, the plan as it was announced indicated quite clearly as to when the plan would begin, and the honourable member knows full well that had we not inherited a budget deficit of $500 million when we came to office, it would not have been necessary to hold back assistance. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, if I've said it once in this House, I've said it 1,000 times. They've been in government for 4 years. 4 long years. 4 very long years for the people of Nova Scotia. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Premier. This Premier and his government know that the reality they have to face at the polls when they go there in the second part of 2003 is that they failed post-secondary students by not treating them as stakeholders in this province's future. The students won't forget that this government misused the Millennium Scholarship funding, this government canceled the loan remission program to start with, and the 4 years they went without a loan remission program was because of this government. So my question to the Premier, he can't escape those facts, so Mr. Speaker, could he please tell Nova Scotia students why he deliberately chose not to treat post-secondary education as a priority?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we have actually focused on post-secondary education in this province. For example, if you look at the record of the previous government when they reduced funding to universities to $175 million, every year we have, since we became government, we have been able to increase that. Our current increased commitment to universities this year is an additional $6 million to make our total payment in the realm of $207 million. In addition, we have formulated an expansion program for post-secondary community college students in this province, a $123 million commitment that will result in 2,500 more seats for community college students right across Nova Scotia, 1,000 new seats here in Metro, 1,500 in rural parts of Nova Scotia, the most ambitious increase in post-secondary education opportunities in my lifetime.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, my suggestion, with all due respect to the Premier, is to remove the rose-colored glasses. Student debt, student debt, student debt, Mr. Speaker. That's what students are faced with now. And he continues to talk about how this government is helping students. But before the next election, Mr. Speaker, the Premier better see the reality for what it really is. This Premier and this government were in office, and students are now worse off than they were 4 years ago. So my final question for the Premier, could he please explain to the students of Nova Scotia who, after going without a loan remission program for 4 years, who lost out on additional student assistance funding and took on more debt, could he explain why this government feels very comfortable in mistreating students?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And yes, it is a problem. One of the cost drivers for tuition fees was the diminished funding provided by the previous government to universities. We addressed that issue very effectively. We are increasing funding to post-secondary education institutions, in particular our universities. In addition, we made a very specific commitment to students in the province that we would introduce a debt reduction program that will allow at least a 30% reduction in student debt by way of the student debt reduction program. We have exceeded that. We have in fact introduced, Mr. Speaker, a student debt reduction program that will allow a student, if they fully apply and qualify for all of the reductions, of over 40%, Mr. Speaker, over 40% of that student debt can be remitted as a result of the action of this government.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you, Mr. Speaker, is to the Minister of Environment and Labour. And the Minister well knows it's been over a year now since the Dorsey report has been completed and on his desk and a previous minister's desk, and it's been largely ignored except for a few focus groups and so on, Mr. Speaker. One of the largest recommendations of the Dorsey report, as the Minister well knows, are the 271 workers from the infamous window period that have been left out because of chronic pain. Now, the Dorsey report recommends that these people get their due compensation. So I want to ask through you, Mr. Speaker, what will the Minister do to explain to these injured workers why he refuses to provide compensation as recommended in the Dorsey report?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable member is well aware that I'll be bringing forward to this House in the fall after the next election amendments to the Workers' Compensation Act, Mr. Speaker, which will implement most of the major recommendations of the Dorsey report.
Honourable member Cape Breton Centre on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know he's wrong on one, and I doubt if he'll do the other. So, Mr. Speaker, what I want to say to this minister, you know, it was the injured workers in this province that have been suffered greatly in the 90s with changes to workers' comp. It was never, ever a change for the better of the injured worker. It was always a freeze or a fence put around them, Mr. Speaker. And these 271 workers have been dealt with extremely harshly, And I believe it's incumbent on the government to do something today, not in some future period when no one knows who's going to be sitting on that side of the House. So will the minister show the injured workers their concerns or this government's concerns and be compensating these 271 injured workers today?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can say heaven help the injured workers if that crowd across the road ever occupy this side of the House. Mr. Speaker, I had I've met with these organizations from around the province, and Mr. Speaker, I can tell the honourable member that we are moving, and we are moving towards implementation of the Dorsey report. However, I'm sure that as he realizes, you cannot create legislation overnight.
Now, member Cape Breton Centre on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, yes, the champion of the worker over there realizes that his government has had this report for over a year. It's not a matter of doing something overnight. It's doing something to substantially help injured workers that have been hurt in this province, feeding their families, Mr. Speaker. That's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about some airy-fairy concept of are we going to get elected, are we not? Are you going to help injured workers? So, Minister, will you commit today fully aware that this will be of no cost to the government? We know WCB is funded not by government, but by the employers. So provide compensation to the 271 injured workers with chronic pain as the Dorsey report asks.
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is putting forth some idiotic instruments of financing that only the NDP could understand. The NDP thinks you can spend money without affecting something you haven't got. Well, Mr. Speaker, I can tell the honourable member opposite that if you raise the workers' compensations contributions, it does have effect on the economy of this province.
The honourable member for Victoria.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question today is for the Minister of Tourism, and it's with regard to the tourist attraction signing policy. Mr. Speaker, it has been known for some time that Nova Scotia needed a new signage policy, and in some cases it may be working. Mr. Speaker, on 100 series highways, different businesses like the Cape Breton Resorts are posted on provincial highway signs. Now, Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the attraction policy where it indicates that advertising costs organizations anywhere from $2,400 on the exit signs and as much as $12,000 for aluminum posted structures. On the 105 highway in Cape Breton, there's a sign that advertises Cape Breton Resorts, owned by a well-known conservative businessman. 5 separate businesses owned by the same person are listed. Could the minister indicate whether or not Cape Breton Resorts meet the criteria and how much this costs the company?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I can assure the member that the work that our department does very closely with the industry is work that we feel is very important to the growth of the tourism industry. But as such, that the signage policy falls under transportation, I'll refer that to my colleague, Minister of Transportation.
Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will take the member's question under advisement. I'm not as aware of the signs he's referring to and clearly couldn't be anticipating his question.
The Honourable Member for Victoria on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the ministers for their reply. Mr. Speaker, I'm asking the question so that Nova Scotians get a better understanding of the policy. So, to save me the partisan bluster, my concern, Mr. Speaker, is that smaller operations and more seasonal operations are left behind by this policy. So my question to the minister, whichever minister, does the minister feel that the access to the 100 series highway signage is accessible for smaller businesses with less deep pockets than those who own the Cape Breton Resorts?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member knows that signage policy has always been very difficult. And it involves a number of criteria, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, safety being a paramount consideration, Mr. Speaker, but also the tourism industry in Nova Scotia itself has had a great deal of concern about the proliferation of highway signs along our 100 series highways, Mr. Speaker. And we have worked very closely in this government in developing this highway signage policy in order to take up the concerns of Nova Scotia's tourism industry. Mr. Speaker, we do not want this to become Las Vegas. We do not want every road in the province to be flashing with lights. And, Mr. Speaker, that involves making some choices about where signs get put and where they don't get put.
The member for Victoria on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister. But, Mr. Speaker, the point I'm trying to make is that the smaller businesses are left out. If you have the money, sure, you can advertise on the provincial signs. But my concern is for the smaller business who cannot afford the high costs of highway signage. So I'll ask the Minister again, what is the government doing to ensure that smaller businesses have better access to signage along the highways so they can compete with the larger business and organizations?
Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And this is a very serious question, and I can assure you the government in my department is very interested in working with small business. But Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to note that the present policy is a lot more fair to small business than the former situation was. Mr. Speaker, don't forget that before you had to put up huge signs at great distance from the highway, which small business never were able to afford, Mr. Speaker. The present policy, in fact, does afford an opportunity for small business to have signs on highways where before, if you didn't have tons of money, you just couldn't be visible on 100 Series Highway.
Now, member for Halifax Needham.
Mr. Speaker, my office receives a call every few weeks from a woman who is caring for her husband in their home. Every time she calls, she asks, have they changed the rules for nursing homes yet? I want to ask the Premier, how can you allow seniors to continue living in fear of the financial assessment process when it means putting off getting necessary care?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the member's voice didn't carry well across the House, but I believe she was asking about care in the nursing homes of the province of Nova Scotia. If that was her question, I can say that I have visited many of the nursing homes in Nova Scotia. In my previous life, I had weekly, if not more frequent, visits to two of the very significant nursing homes in my area. And I can say, Mr. Speaker, that the care in those nursing homes is second to none. We do look after the seniors in our nursing homes very, very well. There should be no complaint about the level of care.
The member for Halifax Needham on your first supplementary.
Well, it wasn't a question, Mr. Speaker, it wasn't a question about the level of care in homes. This is a family that can't get into the nursing homes because of this government's policy. Mr. Speaker, the reason this senior is calling is because she's afraid. She lives in fear of the financial assessment process, even with the changes in November 2002. Premier, in spite of your minor tinkering with the system, this senior is pushing herself beyond her limits to care for her husband until she sees meaningful change. Mr. Speaker, I ask the Premier, why didn't your government bring fairness to the long-term care system when you had the chance?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And one of the immediate things we did do was change the assessment process, and it was